Yeah, yeah.
Okay, I think we just started the Zoom stream. There's a whole new process of Zooming, of streaming today. So hopefully this is working and people are live streaming the class. I'll hear from Seth whether or not it's working or not working. Um, Hi, Marilyn. Hi, Ellen.
Hi.
Hi, Paul. Hi, George.
Whoa.
Paul, are you going to be here this Shabbat?
Friday night, yes. Saturday, probably not.
Will you remind me? I want to show you the chuppah poles that we have because I want to ask your opinion about one of the sets of the chuppah poles. Okay?
All right, Rabbi, but I'm not marrying anytime soon.
That may be, but nevertheless, there are others who are getting married. Wedding season is in full. I have weddings constantly now for the next few months. So
I'd be happy to help you anyway.
thank you. Thank you. Okay, well, it's nice to be back. I've missed teaching this class. I've missed all of you. That's not to say that I didn't enjoy my vacation. I did very much, but it's always good to be back to be doing some learning together. So you studied with David. You looked at the different haftarot of the summer cycle. We're going to go back to what we were doing before, which was the Torah portion of the week, either using the stuff from the Institute for Jewish Spirituality. I'm going back and forth between the two different rabbis whose materials I prepare for you. So today we're going to be looking at, excuse me, the materials from Rabbi Jonathan Slater. So let me find it on my screen. Hold on one second. Lunch and learn. Okay, now I'm ready to share. Okay, what are you all looking at?
Lunch and learn. ספר דברים, פרק י"ד, I think.
Perfect. Okay. I have so many things open on my screen. I want to make sure you're seeing that as opposed to Cantor Jackie Raffi's installation speech, which I was just working on. Okay. Let me extend it a little bit. Okay. So let's begin with our bracha. In case people have not had a chance to learn Torah today, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asot.
Torah.
Okay. Hi, Ziggy. How are you? Okay. So we are looking at Deuteronomy chapter 14, and we're going to be looking at Deuteronomy chapter 15. Deuteronomy, as we all know, maybe we don't know, so let me make sure that we know. Deuteronomy is the second telling of Moshe's speech to the Israelites for how they should live their life. Moshe has come to the end of his life. The Israelites have come to the end of their wanderings in the wilderness. They're about to enter the land of Israel at the end of the book of Numbers. And Deuteronomy pauses before the journey into the land of Israel with a reiteration by Moshe of those things that are important to the people of Israel, and his assurances to the children of Israel that they will follow and observe God's mitzvot. Re'eh, I think, is best summarized in the opening sentence of the Torah portion, which basically says, "See, I set before you this day blessings and curses. Blessings if you follow my ways, curses if you don't follow my ways." Then the rest of the Torah portion is an elucidation of and a clarification of what does it mean to follow God's ways. And there are lots and lots of mitzvot, not as many mitzvot as we will see in a couple of later parshiot, like Shoftim and Kitetse. But this has a lot of different ways in which we, as Jews, the Israelites then, needed to live their life according to the rules of God. One of the big sections of this Torah portion has to do with kashrut, the laws of kashrut. Another section has to do with the observances of some of the basic calendar things of Jewish life. And then there's a whole issue on poverty. So we're going to be looking at two of those things, one having to do with kashrut and the other having to do with poverty. George, I saw your hand up.
The opening, can you hear me, by the way? Do I have it on? Okay. A is singular. C. Nathan, plural. You. In other words, why isn't A or E or U, in the plural?
You're asking me the why? I can't tell you why because I wasn't there when it was written or given by God. I could only tell you perhaps what the commentators have said about noticing that grammatical inconsistency. And what they have said, George, is that yes, it's true that the command is to the community. God is speaking to all of the children of Israel. However, we each individually need to hear the message for ourselves and to know that when we behave and act as individuals, our individual actions and behaviors impact far more than just us. That our actions impact an entire community. And I think it's certainly easy for us to understand that if we just contextualize that in the world of the debates about wearing masks and not wearing masks in America today. The feeling in wearing masks is that not only are you protecting yourself, but you're protecting other people. And we should have a responsibility towards not only doing what is right for us, but what is good for all of those around us. And if that may not be an ideal in American life, it is certainly an ideal in Jewish life. And Re'eh is just one of the many Torah portions that remind us that that is indeed how we as Jews need to be guided. So, George, I hope that answers your question.
Rabbi, can you please enlarge the font?
Of course I can.
Thank you.
Whoops.
Thank you.
Actually, can 18 work? Is that good enough?
Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
Okay, so Leora, would you be kind enough to read just that little piece in the Hebrew right there from Deuteronomy 14:13? As I said, this comes in the part of a larger discussion about what animals are kosher and what animals are not kosher. Can you read it, or is it still?
I think I can. Thank you. והראה ואת האיה והדיין למינה.
Okay, so here he's listing a certain number of birds which are not kosher. So birds which we know are kosher are basically birds that are not scavengers, birds that fly. Here, these birds, the kite, the falcon, and the buzzard of any variety, they are not considered kosher because they're scavengers. But the Hasidic commentator, and we don't know who it is, it's anonymous, so I don't know. So it just comes from a book called Torah Gems. So we don't know who it specifically was, but this Hasidic commentator is commenting on the first animal and the kite. Does anybody know what a kite is?
I don't.
So Scott, do you know what a kite is? Not a flying kite as in the kite that we hold as children, but the kite of a bird. I think it's in the same family as the hawk.
The hawk. The hawk.
Yes. So I believe a kite is a hawk.
Kite is a hawk.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you. The Hebrew name for the kite is what has created an opportunity for the biblical commentator to make this comment, or excuse me, for the Hasidic commentator to make this comment, because the Hebrew word for a kite is a ra'ah. And what is ra'ah in Hebrew? What is the verb ra'ah, ro'eh?
Leroy, yeah.
To see, exactly, to see. So what's the connection the Hasidic commentator wants to make between this bird and seen? Ellen, thank you for that little note. Hawk, eagle, kite all belong to the falcon family. I think I knew that because I read a book many years ago by Heather McDonald called H is for Hawk. And it's a beautiful book of her experience flying hawks. And it's just a really beautiful nature book. So if ever you're interested, she actually just came out with another book of short essays on nature, Heather McDonald, a really magnificent, magnificent writer. In this book, she also tells a story of her own overcoming grief and loss and her relationship to her father. H is for Hawk is the name of the book. Okay, who would like to read the passage from Torah Gems? Okay, I'll read the passage from Torah Gems. Among the birds identified as impure is one known as Ra'ah. Regarding this bird, the sages taught in the Talmud, it is called such because it has profound vision, a pun on the name and the verb to see, ro'eh, from afar. It can be in Babylonia and still see carrion in the land of Israel. Okay, don't read any further, excuse me. Let's just understand this first paragraph. Welcome, Jill. It's nice to see you're with us today, even if I don't see you live. What is the first paragraph basically saying? Why is this kite, this hawk, called a ra'ah?
Thank you, Rabbi. I'm driving. See you soon. I'll see you soon.
Okay, great.
The kite has tremendous vision.
Yeah.
Exactly. And we I think know that as much as we may or may not know about birds. I do believe that we all know that eagles, kites, falcons, hawks can see a tiny little mouse in the prairie and be miles away and still be able to dive and grab that mouse for lunch or dinner. So, right, it can be as far as Babylonia and still see what it wants to eat in the land of Israel. Well, what does this mean to us? How is this relevant to our own lives? If this bird has such precise and profound eyesight that it can see from Babylonia to the land of Israel, why is it considered among the impure birds? It is because one who sees only carrion, that is the debased and the corrupt, in others is impure himself. Classic Hasidic master in turning this seemingly irrelevant piece of Torah into a great moral message for our own behaviors. What basically is the Hasidic master teaching us?
Rabbi, is that because all he thinks is about food and how to satisfy himself, rather than doing, I don't know, maybe saving a bird in trouble? Or
Excellent. Okay, very good. So one possible way of being able to read this, as Leora just said, is what is the purpose of the hawk's or the kite's great eyesight? The purpose of the hawk's great eyesight is basically survival. It's to feed itself, and it has no regard for anybody else.
But that's as it should be as an animal.
Of course, but
And
if
We're not
you're absolutely right.
right.
Besides that, Rabbi, there's a big contradiction in here because these birds do not eat carrion or they don't scavenge. They eat live animals. unlike
I think-
buzzards or vultures.
Okay, so
I'd call the
will
bird.
you hold off on the second point before and let's just focus on the first point that you made. Repeat the first point that you made. You said, what did you say, Paul?
This is the purpose of the animal, is to sustain itself, to keep surviving, and they do that by eating. What animal doesn't do that?
Okay, good. So if this was a science book, if the Torah was a science book, Paul's explanation, which is absolutely accurate and appropriate, would make sense. But for the Hasidic rabbis, for all of our darshanim, all of those who interpret Torah, it's not a science book, it's a book of morality and ethics. And so what they want to be able to do is derive some kind of lesson from the parable, from the message. And so the lesson is, go ahead, Marilyn.
I was going to say that when with the bird, they go by instinct. There's no spiritual aspect of it. There's no decision, a moral decision made, and that's the difference that I think between the human and an animal. And if you want to extrapolate it to be for humans, I mean, if you're always looking for the worst in an individual, it was saying that you only see the carry-on.
Excellent. Okay, so thank you, Marilyn.
Point.
Two very important points. The first is that the whole idea behind kashrut is to elevate the human above animal instinct. So one could say, Paul, just as that it's the instinct of the animal to see the animal that it needs to eat and eat it to survive, so too we could say it is with human beings. Whatever we have is ours, and we need it in order to survive. And we know, we've seen it in the animal world, we've seen enough films to know that an animal can capture a small, let's say, wolf or hyena could capture a large animal, and there's no way that that small animal can eat that entire animal, but it will chase everybody else away when it's eating its animal to protect its kill. So the instinct, I think, is the same like with me and French fries. If I'm eating French fries and there's people hovering around my French fries, I'm going to do everything I can to keep them away from my French fries. Right? That's my animal instinct. But then I'm going to pause and I'm going to say, but wait a minute, isn't it better for me to share my French fries? Isn't it the more gracious sides of my being, my less animalistic sides? And so, yes, Paul, you're absolutely right. But for the rabbis, what they're trying to do is say, we also can be like the kite. We have that same instinct, but we could rise above that instinct of the animal within us and approach food and eating and sharing in a way that reflects holiness and sacredness.
I completely understand that. And by the way, when a hyena or a wolf attacks an animal and kills it and begins eating, he has first right. But then he leaves and the other members of the pack come and feed as well. But I see that what the Hasidism are trying to do. I mean, when they say the debased and the corrupt, we can substitute the weak and the vulnerable in there. And that do we take advantage of those people for our own good, for our own survival?
Yes. And, somebody was just saying to me the other day, and I want to then turn around and get back to Marilyn's second comment. And then I saw Ellen's hand raised. Hi, Carrie. Welcome. It's nice to have you with us. It's nice to see you. Somebody just said to me the other day that if a creature from outer space was to come and land on Earth and land in the city of Los Angeles and see the palatial houses that exist in LA and the 66,000 people living on the streets in tents, they would wonder what kind of creature we humans are, that we can have such a gross distortion of wealth in our society and not do anything to fix that, or not do more than we're doing to fix that. And Paul, I think in a sense, that's exactly what you're saying in your comment. I want to go back to Marilyn's second statement, and then Ellen, and then George, who had their hands up. The second statement, Marilyn, that you commented on was, will you repeat it again, since it was a while ago?
Let me see if I can remember. If I can remember that for if you only see carrion or the bad corruption and or bad things in other people, you miss the boat on humanity, and you yourself are impure.
Exactly. So the French philosopher Levinas, who in this crowd, oh wait, where did Paul go? Oh, there you are. I don't know why sometimes, do you always notice in Zoom that the screens shift around, that when you know somebody's there, then all of a sudden they move, and I'm not sure why they move. So anyways, so Emmanuel Levinas, which Paul is a little bit familiar with from his study of Musar, and Jill as well, his whole philosophy was based, oh, and Leora also, I'm forgetting all of you in my Musar class, was based upon the ability to see in the other the face of the infinite. And to, even if there is debasement in that other person, even if there is sin in that other person, even if there is like ugliness in that other person, can we view the person not only through the lens of their debasement, their sin, their ugliness, but rather through the infinite qualities of the divine face that resides in that individual? That's the way in which we need to use our eyes, our sight, our insight, our ability to truly see the other, not just the carrion that resides in the surface of the other. And that's not a kosher way of seeing, right? A unkosher way of seeing is by seeing the ugliness in the other. And it's unfortunate that, with so much homelessness, we have a tendency to not even see it at all, because it just becomes like part of the landscape. And when we don't see it at all, right, we contribute to the suffering that exists in that homelessness. So, okay, wow. Isn't that funny? It's not funny to you, but to me, when I was preparing this, I figured, okay, we'll spend about 5 minutes on this first text because it's fairly straightforward. And here we are 20 minutes into the class and still on this first text. So Ellen and then George, you have been incredibly patient.
Rabbi, I have nothing else to add at this point. Thank you for calling in, Leah.
Okay, I'm sorry, Ellen. I'm sure what you were going to say. I apologize. George.
Yeah, I'm looking at those three birds. I'm no expert on that, but the buzzard, doesn't that eat carrion? And the others go for live things.
Birds of prey.
So, they're just lumping them together. But, we said the falcon goes after live prey and the buzzard goes after, something that's dead. So, okay, for the for the buzzard, I don't know how far it sees, but it may be a good point, but taking it from that verse, I don't know.
So what is it? Are you saying that the Torah should not have lumped them all together? Are you saying that the ethical teaching of this Hasidic master doesn't work with the kite and the falcon?
Good idea ethically, but to connect it, you're stretching it.
Fair. Okay, so good. Thank you.
Yeah.
So we should remember, we should put somewhere in the back of our minds that often a midrashic attempt to make meaning on the Torah doesn't work like a mathematical proof.
Yeah.
And of course, I say that to everybody, but particularly to George, who has a doctorate in mathematics.
No, in business and economics.
Oh, in business and economics, but you taught
Mhm.
mathematics for, didn't you also teach mathematics?
No, just econ and business. So,
Okay, but you have a good,
you got to look, at numbers and
you have a good background in
how to make
economics.
sense,
you,
logically, all
yes,
that.
you know your geometry. It doesn't always line up exactly, the proof, when you use the techniques of midrash.
Yeah.
Sometimes midrash is an attempt, will stretch
Yeah.
a little bit further along than the way our rational minds would work. And yet, I think that the message behind the stretch is still a valuable lesson.
I think we can give the sage the benefit of the doubt and say he probably doesn't know much about ornithology at that point.
Well,
No, and that very well could be. You're right. He may not be an expert in knowing the distinctions between these animals.
But I think that it's, they're going by instinct, all of them, and they don't make a choice. That's what they have to do. And, maybe there's the shades of grayish but I take it as these birds are doing something instinctual without a choice, without a higher choice.
Good. Ellen.
I did put it in the chat, but I think what the rabbis are saying, there's difference between what you do as your action and what you see, what you choose to see, and how you see and interpret the world. And the birds, yes, they don't eat the dead things, but they are still far seeing. And this is the whole point of this piece, is how do we choose to see the world around us and the people around us?
Beautiful, right? That's excellent. Thank you. So the questions that Rabbi Slater presents, right? Are you eagle-eyed to see the good or the bad in others? Right? And does it depend on the situation? And what leads you to see bad in others? How do you feel in the moment about the other and about yourself? When we see the carrion in others, when we see the bad in others, is that an expression of them, or is it really an expression of ourselves, of how we feel about ourselves? Carrie.
I think you see things depending on your own personal experience. So you interpret things through those eyes. And sometimes if you've had no experience, with any whatever person you're seeing, you don't see the negative unless you always see negative in yourself. So your own experience colors everything that you do. I think the more positive experiences you have, the more likely you're going to see just the good. Doesn't depend on the situation because you've had those prior situations.
Excellent. Thank you. 100%. Ellen.
This reminds me, though, of implicit bias. So often we just make an assumption based on our own experience or based on what we've heard or learned about a particular group of people, and we make assumptions. And they're usually "I'm scared" assumptions, or because an implicit bias is a way we protect ourselves to move away from something that's fearful to us.
I mentioned, many months ago, the book by Isabel Wilkerson, Caste. Did any of you have a chance to read that book? So do you remember the story? For those who haven't yet read it, I, again, still encourage you to read it. It's a phenomenal book. But she tells the story as a New York Times columnist that she's going to meet with somebody to do an interview in New York. And the person refuses to accept her, right, this black woman, as the correspondent from the New York Times. And he refuses to be interviewed by her because of his implicit bias. Oh, really? An African-American woman can't be a correspondent for the New York Times? In his head, it's impossible to see that. And therefore, he does not give her the time of day at all. Marilyn.
I've used this expression before, but people are tribal. And oftentimes, whatever the pressures of the tribe are the assumptions that you have for other people.
Yeah. Now, I mean, I don't want to say, and this is a larger philosophical discussion. Being tribal is not in of itself a bad thing.
No, no, but I'm, philosophy tribal,
Yes.
whatever
There's,
tribe.
right. There's something very profound about
belonging,
belonging to a people as a way of shaping who you are and how you see the world. But that doesn't mean that your tribe should be exclusive and better than exactly.
Rabbi?
Yeah, Paul.
I take it farther than where Ellen took it, because I see this, seeing the bad in others, and as a way of deflecting my own insufficiencies, and perhaps even projecting my own issues onto the other, pointing it out toward them, so that I don't really have to face it myself.
Yeah.
For sure. For sure. I think it's both. It's definitely implicit bias, and it is also exactly what you said. And it's unfortunate that for many of us, we carry so many of our own insecurities that we then extend outward to other people, and it changes the way in which we behave towards them, see them, etc. Rachel. Welcome, Rachel. It's nice to see you.
Thanks, Rabbi. Likewise, welcome back.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Shalom all. As I'm listening, I started thinking of, and I'm looking at that first question and prompt, and thinking about a notion known as the halo effect. I don't know if you're familiar, you all on the call here, psychological term for attributing positive characteristics onto a person that, whether to the individual or large amount of people in general, is seen as aesthetically attractive. We attribute them being, generally more sociable, intelligent, maybe a natural leader, etc. And so I think about how one might be eagle-eyed quickly to find positives in that scenario, but then simultaneously kind of do, I guess, the other side of that with the negative, like a lot of the things we've been saying already. If we think of our own tribe group self as better, more attractive than another, we might be like saying, oh, look at all these negative things, and it might be part of why we see what we're even seeing in our modern times, but extended from since millennia. So anyway.
Excellent. Thank you. I couldn't agree more. So I threw in question number 4, how can you train yourself to see good and not bad in others? And every morning, if you open up our prayer book, one of the very first prayers that we recite in the morning while we're getting ourselves ready for services is the line, Hareini mekabel alai et mitzvat haboreh, ve'ahavta l'recha kamocha. Whoops. Shouldn't have that repeated twice. Which means, behold, I accept upon myself the commandment of the Creator, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I like to start my day with this meditation. Right? When I come to Minyan, or even when I daven at home, the first thing that I do is I repeat this phrase many times in my head, over and over again, as a way of framing, hopefully, how I'm going to view the people that I then come into contact with throughout my day. Can I see the good and recognize the mitzvah that I have upon myself to love my neighbor as myself? And sometimes that works, sometimes that doesn't work. But this is, for me, the exercise that I use to be more eagle-eyed in seeing the good than eagle-eyed in seeing the bad.
Is that in the beginning of the Siddur, Rabbi?
Yeah. In this one,
weekdays?
I don't think it's in this Siddur. Oh yeah, it is. It is. It's on page 63. It's on page 63 in the Sim Shalom, and the Lev Shalem. I don't have in front of me, Paul, so I can't tell you what page it's on.
Okay, I'll look.
It should be in the first couple pages of the morning service of the Lev Shalem. For those of you who have stopped by the Neshama service that happens once a month that Cantor Rafi and I lead, we always open our service with the singing of Hareini Mikabel Alai. Jill.
Welcome back, Rabbi. It's nice to
Thank
see
you.
I hope you had a nice rest. I was wondering if I came by the synagogue, could I pick up a siddur like you're talking about?
Absolutely. If you just go to the front office and ask Connie for a copy of not a Lev Shalem, because we don't have enough, but the older Sim Shalom, 100%, come and pick it up.
Okay, and is that the book that you're using when you say pages like on Shabbat?
No, we're using the larger one, the Lev Shalem, which I can show you when you come to synagogue so you can see. But the structure is basically the same, and the prayers are more or less the same.
Okay, because I know you guys always are talking about pages, and I don't have a siddur, so.
It is online also, I think. Do any of you use the online version of the siddur by show of hands?
No one does.
Okay.
Well, thank you. It would be
Jill, I can send you to a link, or Connie can send you
I don't know how you do the two together, though. I don't know how.
We don't usually. I mean, when Ken or Jackie and I are leading services these days, we're usually using the Lev Shalem, which is the newer version of the conservative movement's siddur.
It's all right. I can make it work. I just wanted to have some kind of an idea and have I would love to have a siddur to try to do some morning prayers. So that would be great. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, if I'm here when you come in, I'll walk you through it and give you some ideas. Okay, let's take a look at the second source, and we're probably not going to get to the third source, but that's okay. We'll do the second source. So, Leora, are you okay reading again in the Hebrew, the second source? So this comes from this is no longer about kashrut. This is now about, there's a section in Re'eh about how we treat the poor in our community. And we need to open up our hands to those people. And so this verse comes from that section in Deuteronomy that teaches us and trains us how to be gracious and generous to those who have less than we do.
I think specifically they're talking also about the Atom and Almana, right?
For sure, it's mentioned as well.
Yeah.
Here, yes.
נתון תיתן לו, ולא ירא לבבך, בתיתך לו, בתיתך. כי בגלל הדבר הזה יברכך אדוני אלוהיך בכל מעשיך ובכל משלח ידיך.
Okay, so thank you, Leor. Thank you. So give to him readily and have no regrets when you do so. For in return, Adonai your God will bless you in all your efforts and all your undertakings. The first comment by Rabbi Yecheskel of Kozimir has to do with this part of the verse that's emboldened. V'lo yireh levavcha b'titcha lo. The second from the Me'etzor HaChasidut deals with the repetition of this Hebrew verb naton titen. You shall surely give. So if we have time, we'll look at both of them, but we're going to start with this one. You should not have regrets when you give to the other person. George, yes, I saw
I was going to answer the other one, so.
Oh, you were going to do Naton T10. Okay, so hold off on that. Let's get to this one, and then we'll come.
I see לא ירא לבבך בתיתנך לו. Some people do it to show others that they are good and they donate and their name is up there. And it's not from the heart.
Okay, so
Doesn't come.
very good. Leora, just like the last time, the last section, you start us off in a really profound way by framing what is behind the verse. And what's framing behind the verse is what's the intention? What is our intention when we give? Why do we give? How do we give? What is the goal of our giving? Is it about ourselves or is it about the other? At the end of the day, by the way, what's most important? Secondary to intention is what we give.
Yeah.
Because we have to help. Even if we have to help and it's all about ourselves, we're still helping. But we're now talking in an ideal situation. At the highest level of giving, how should giving be done?
Not
What internally needs to be happening? Yeah, George?
anonymously.
Okay, so yes. Now, I'm of course going to be one, who fundraises for our community to always encourage people to publicize their giving because that may generate other people to give as well, and it may generate them to want to give more because that recognition is a powerful tool. So I don't want to be crass, and I don't want to be idealistic, and I want us to be realistic in understanding that at the end of the day, the goal is fundraising. The goal is to be able to make a difference. And the money that we raise necessarily does that. But here we're speaking in the most ideal of settings and situations. Rachel and then Paul.
I was just thinking of, at least with the question of giving and so I suppose quote unquote ideal of Maimonides, is it, I think 8 levels?
Yeah, 8 levels,
Thank you.
correct.
Thank you. Thank you for that validation. So, right, is not the highest that it's not only anonymous, but that what you're giving is in such a manner that it equips or scaffolds the individual to kind of be elevated and kind of like a giving that keeps giving, if you will, instead of just a singular gift.
Yes, more or less, that you want to make the person dependent from giving, so that they become independent and can find their own means to be able to take care of themselves.
Yeah, teaching them the fish versus the fish.
You got it. Yes. Paul, you're still muted.
So I understand in your fundraising attempts why you want to bring distinction to the person giving. What I've never understood is why are the amounts listed of the giving? Because that seems to be more likely to embarrass or shame if somebody gives more than me, or I don't know. It's always rubbed me the wrong way when the amounts of donations are listed specifically.
Yeah, I'm not a professional fundraiser, but I'm guessing if I was to understand professional fundraising, why organizations do that, it is the psychological boost that some people have in saying to themselves, hey, right, I know Paul's, lifestyle. I have a sense of his financial wherewithal. I can't believe he's in this category and I'm only in this category. If Paul can be in that category, then certainly I could be in that category. And I think that's the psychological impetus behind listing in categories. And most organizations try to create the categories broad enough to be encouraging as opposed to discouraging. That being said, Paul, I haven't taken a fundraising class. I haven't studied this stuff. So I'm only venturing a possible guess as to why that is the way it is.
I like what they do at the shul where, there's donations and they just say, so-and-so in honor of so-and-so, and you don't know if they gave 18 or 1,800. And I think that's nice.
Yeah, most of the time, I think that's the way we do it. I think there are certain times when we make distinctions between major donors and in terms of the amount of money that's given. But let's take a look at what the Hasidic rabbi teaches us. Let's take a look at what Yecheskel of Kozimir offers us in terms of understanding this verse. Consider our verse in this light. For Adonai is righteous, God loves righteous deeds, the upright shall behold God's face. So he takes this verse from the book of Psalms as a way of transposing it into this section in order to give us insight into the biblical verse. In general, those who receive tzedakah do not hold their heads up. Rather, they tend to look downward, embarrassed to look into the face of the one who is giving to them. But tzedakot ahav, Adonai tzedakot ahav, God loves tzedakot, the blessed. In other words, the one who is receiving the charity, God loves. So that he could look directly into his face. The recipient does not feel themselves as lowly and can therefore look into the face of the donor. Yeah, Ziggy.
In this time of COVID, where people that have never touched an ounce of tzedakah from anybody, all of a sudden they're facing the need for tzedakah. The whole thing is bound to make a big difference in people, to make them understand it. There by the grace of God go I. So that's where this would fit in.
So what I hear, Ziggy, you saying is that it's easy for us to look at another human being on the receiving side of tzedakah with judgment. How could they have gotten themselves into this mess? I can't believe they're there. And in a sense, that lowers their dignity. But what you're saying is that in the world that we live in today, it is not for us to judge and place judgments upon people who are in need of our tzedakah, our support. Because there are so many extenuating circumstances that exist in people's lives that judgment should never be a factor when giving tzedakah. We should always elevate the other person and see in that other person the face of God.
Mm-hmm.
And in seeing the face of God in the other person, remove all judgments from why or how or what with regard to the position of that person and their need for tzedakah. Thank you, Ziggy. Jennifer, welcome.
Hey, I've so missed you guys. I don't want to, and I'm so sorry to join late. I wanted to apologize to you personally and to everybody, and hope to rectify all of this.
We're glad you're
from
with
now on.
us,
Anyway,
even for a little bit.
Hey, thank you. Hey, I wanted to say I actually have the exact opposite reaction when I see someone who is destitute, homeless, without. I always feel that because we're born of the same, the humanness, the human nature. I always feel that I could be that close to being in that person's situation. And so I didn't know if that was it. And it also actually made me think of, because I had just been learning about this, you don't boil a kid in its mother's milk. The idea that, don't see a child of God in the munificence that, we have been fortunate enough to enjoy. Don't cook them. So, anyway, that was.
So one
Thank
of the
you,
ways.
everybody.
No, so good. So what Jennifer again reiterates is that in order to be able to see the image of God in other people, it is to be able to say, as you said, Ziggy, also, but for the grace of God, that could be me. Right? How easy it is for situations to reverse themselves. I'm sure all of you have been exposed to, have read stories about individuals who are suffering from homelessness, who were in homes, who had jobs, who through a series of very unfortunate twists and turns, find themselves without the means to be able to care for themselves the way they were months and years ago. And to look with repugnancy on such individuals is really shameful.
It's also, that the moratorium on evictions has stopped, and 6.5 million people are threatened with eviction, having jobs, having careers, but not being able to pay their rent because of the pandemic and the loss of their income. And, what are we going to look down on them because they may be homeless now? It's just so tragic. And our judgment only makes it that much more tragic.
For sure. And our politics, right? Because, so Biden just voted to extend the moratorium on evictions. And then there are those who are claiming that there is no judicial basis, legal basis for him to do that. And this is going to end up another battle that divides our country, like so many other things divide our country.
Rabbi?
Yes, ma'am.
CNN ran a story a couple days ago. This woman with 3 young girls was a card dealer in Vegas, and she lost her job, and she's on the brink of losing the apartment. She's packed all her furniture. She's sold her plasma, to have money to pay for food and stuff for her kids. So CNN, they had a GoFundMe page, and I think they've raised over $200,000. And the comments on social media, some of them are just horrendous about, I hope she doesn't blow the money. How did she get where she is? Blah, 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 and people with the right mindset are saying, just leave it. She deserved it, and maybe she'll pay it forward. And now they interviewed her yesterday, and she said that she's going to use some of the money to help other people. Now, whether she does or not, who knows? But, that was a classic case of judgment. Of course, there was a racial factor in that too. And, so that, all the haters from that side, weighed in on it. So, but no, that's a classic example.
And again, it goes back to, thank you for sharing it. It goes back to the difference between our own individual rights versus our obligations to the other. And Judaism's focus is never on rights, it's always on obligation. And America's focus is on rights, not an obligation. And in this American mindset of, if you just work hard, you can pull yourself up from any, challenging position to make it in the world today. The reality is that's not the case. That is just not the case. That may have been the America, 100 years ago, but it's not the America of today. People who are working very, very hard, as you said, Paul, I think it was Paul, who still cannot earn enough to be able to afford rent and food and healthcare and everything else. So dignity, that's the upshot of both of these, right? The first one, the kite, and the second one, v'lo yera levavcha b'titcha lo. How do you have dignity? The third one, which we'll just read very quickly, just to close out, teaching of Rab Simcha Bunim, do not give solely out of the compassion of your heart. Interesting, right? He's making a distinction for us between tzedakah and charity. Charity is based upon experiences of and emotions of compassion and love. Tzedakah has to do with righteousness and doesn't take into consideration how we might feel about the person. It was his practice to give twice to the poor, when they came in and when they left. His students asked him about this. Had he not already given the tzedakah just a few moments before? He replied, "The first time I gave out of the compassion rooted in every heart, but now I give to them in response to God's commandment." What a great lesson, right? We may be moved to give, and so we give. But being moved to give doesn't fulfill the obligation that we have to lifting the person out of their dire needs. That desires more than just the feeling of compassion. It requires the righteousness of balancing what we have and what our obligations are to others to ensure that those others equally have.
So if we give the same sum of money to, where do we really make that distinction? Can we?
What do you mean the same sum of money?
In other words, if I give $200 to this one or $200 to that one, do I really need to consider whether it's from my heart or from the mitzvah of tzedakah?
I think that if you want to delve more deeply into the mitzvah of tzedakah, then your intent plays a significant role in understanding who you are and how you're observing the mitzvah. And what if you have no feelings towards the other person? What if you're not motivated at all by compassion, by empathy? Does that mean you're relieved of your obligation to give to that other person? Of course not. So if motivation becomes the primary factor, or compassion and empathy becomes the primary factor, then you're mixing that up with what is the true nature of what tzedakah is.
Rabbi, I just wanted to ask relatedly about the, I guess it's a tzedakah done, I can't remember the exact around time, if it was around Pesach or even coming up, where everybody's supposed to give a little bit of something, even those who might consider themselves kind of impoverished and receive from others themselves. Does anyone know what I'm talking about?
So in general, Judaism teaches us that even those who receive tzedakah are obligated to give that piece of tzedakah to somebody who is even more in need themselves, so that they also then can have dignity in their receiving. They can also help somebody else. And the obligation of tzedakah is to everybody. All right, all. I unfortunately, it's 1 o'clock. I have to leave, but so do I'm sure some of you as well. It's good to be back. Good to continue teaching. There may be some weeks in August where I'm switching off with David because he wasn't ready to give up this class. He loves teaching as well. So, and I wouldn't want to, deprive him of the opportunity of learning, or you of the opportunity of learning from him. So we'll be back and forth. Some will be with me, some will be with him as we move forward through the month of August.
Rabbi, quick question. Have you read Morality by Rabbi Sachs?
No. That was the last book that he wrote, right?
Correct.
Before he died.
Correct.
No, not yet.
I highly suggest it.
I will get to it one of these days. Thank you, Paul. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. We'll see you for Shabbat.
Thank you also for making such an effort to keep our education going, switching between.
Uh-oh.
So.
I lost you, Jennifer. Did everybody else lose her?
No, I can hear her. Can you hear us, Rabbi?
Thank you all for making an effort, and then I didn't hear the rest of it.
To keep our education going, taking the time to alternate teaching with, so thank you. It means so much to us.
You are very welcome. You are very welcome. All right, everybody. Take care. Be well. See you soon.